are 114 names of German Jews who died in the First World War. And I think that to my daughter Judy, that got to her the irony that there they had given their lives for their fatherland, and look what happened.
Right. So on Kristallnacht, when the Nazis came into your home, actually they were the brown shirts.
Yes, but they were in civvies so that it would look like a people's uprising.
So it was civilian clothes, and
yes.
they came...
They came and they rang the bell, and I think I had the kind of nerve, or as we Jews say, chutzpah, which is the same as nerve. I said they asked for my father, said, "Where's Dr. Abelson?" And I said, "Show me some ID." I must have been a little off, because how dare I, at this situation, with I alone in the house with holding my little brother's hand. And they pushed me aside and said, "It's not necessary today." And I said, "My father's not here, he's in America." They wanted proof. So they went into our living room with a beautiful hand-carved Renaissance desk, put their feet on the desk, as we Americans do, but Germans didn't used to do that, and said, "We want proof." And I pulled out an envelope of a letter that my father had written, and they said, "That's no proof." But somehow God must have looked out for Peter and me, because they went through the whole house, they looked, they didn't take anything, they didn't molest me, which happened in other places, and they left. So I think to this day I'm eternally grateful. And what I also wanted to say, that the next, because you rightfully go back to Kristallnacht, the next few days I looked, and not only I, behind the curtains. We lived in a mixed neighborhood, Jews and non-Jews, and this is what we saw for 3 days straight. Two men in a dark raincoat, black hat, walked into a house, and 5 minutes later they came out with a Jew between them. Those are the Jews that you, in your introduction, you mentioned, that were then taken to concentration camps, and it was frightening. My father, as a doctor, shared an office with a Dr. Cohn, who was an ear, nose, and throat man. He was arrested early in the morning, and 2 hours later, Mrs. Cohn was called and said, "Pick up your husband's body."
Oh.
It's hard to fathom.
It is hard to fathom that.
And I had a cousin that was killed by the Nazis. He was a few years older than I. My small family otherwise is incredibly fortunate that the 4 of us came out and lived and are here to tell the story.
And your father had the foresight to go to America right before Kristallnacht.
Yes, but I don't think he knew that he had a foresight. I think it was high time as things got worse and worse, and he was able, through some connection that we won't go into and don't have time for, he came through Czechoslovakia. He knew someone at the American consulate, and thank God. America's immigration laws, it's not Kristallnacht, but it's perhaps of interest historically, were last done, well, they've since been redone, in 1923. And it was distributed that people could come to the United States on the basis of our percentage of people from, let's say, that had come from England, from France, etc., etc. And the German quota, because of what happened under Hitler, was of course filled in no time at all, because it was the German Jews among all, even though they didn't all leave early, but it was the German Jew who applied for a visa, as it was called, or an affidavit in those days. And to my great regret, and we all adored at the time FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I don't know whether it was his fault, but we thought it was. He made no effort to talk to Congress and change these unused portions, these unused visa. There weren't that many French Jews that applied. There weren't that many English Jews. Right. They stayed there. They felt very English. And so we think in retrospect that more Jews could have been saved. Mrs. Roosevelt is the only one in that family who was able to bring to a place in the East Coast called Oswego 900 German Jewish children to the United States. So that one also has to say good things.
Right.
And there were, aside from Kristallnacht, there were caring, wonderful people that helped. And I know that in Israel, if you have a chance to ever go there, that at the Yad Vashem, the wonderful, if you can call it wonderful, the way it's laid out, a Holocaust museum, there is a whole street. It's the Alley of the Righteous, the Allée of the Righteous, a French word, where Gentiles who had helped Jews to survive are recognized in memoriam or so on and so forth.
And there were quite a few who helped the Jews.
But not enough.
Not enough, because many of just the average German citizen actually took part in the atrocities on a daily basis.
Yes, I mean, I was very young. I can't tell you today who should have done what, but it was clear that there was an overwhelming positive feeling for Hitler and what he was doing. Don't forget, he went into one country after another and conquered. He was such a conqueror. And one could not believe that it would be so vicious for others as well, but particularly for the Jews.
And he actually came into Germany at a time when they needed leadership, and they were kind of beaten down psychologically, financially.
Financially, particularly. Right. And the communists were quite strong in those days, but he was so organized, and he had the brown shirts, and he grew by leaps, they grew by leaps and bounds.
And what is your first memory of Hitler, Adolf Hitler?
That's hard to say.
What was your impression of him?
He was my enemy. I mean, I knew from day one he made no secret out of the fact that he hated the Jews and they were scurvy. I mean, it was unbelievable how we were spoken of, and that stays with you. Again, I have to say something that is a positive thing. On that, two things, and I know we're probably running out of time. On the way home, from when I went home after I saw the synagogue that had been burned down, and I walked home, we had a small, still there, river in my hometown where you take steps, go all the way down, and the river it's a pathetic river, this small, but you could walk on the side as we have in these old towns.
Right.
And I saw a couple of Jews in their garb, in the traditional garb with the kaftan and the, being beaten unmercifully. That's something that I remember very, very clearly.
And that was totally condoned.
Well, who would have said no? I mean, this is, who were those men? I never knew who those men were. There were probably two innocent people who were on the street, and they beat them. Right. And some of them were beaten to death, and some of them escaped. But
So you talk about the brown shirts versus the black shirts.
And black shirts were the elite.
The elite. And they were the SS?
That's the SS.
And they were Hitler's private police.
Well, yeah, but they were, I don't know the numbers, but there are many, many SS men. And they were, as I said, they were the elite, and they executed Hitler's wishes. That's true. And the SR were like we would say, the people's police. Brown shirts, just as vicious, but not as, maybe, I can't even use that word, classy. I mean, it's...
Right, right.
They had different uniforms, and we've all seen the movies and pictures of brown shirts and with a red, I think, kerchief, etc., and matching hats, and the SS were in stark black.
And the SA, or the brown shirts, a lot of them were actually youth, young men, adolescents, some of them.
Yes, but there were also older people.
And the black shirts, some of those were actually World War I veterans, weren't they?
You mentioned that before. I am not so familiar with that, and I don't want to say something that I really haven't got a true answer for. It's possible because the First World War was from 14 to 18.
Right.
And this started in 1933. undoubtedly there were some of them among them because of the age.
Right.
Simply because of the age.
Right. And how did the Gestapo fit into that?
Well, the Gestapo was the secret police. And I didn't bring it, but actually I have some copies at home of some of the Gestapo where my parents are mentioned. I mean, they just kept track of everything and everybody. And they, of course, would arrest you before anybody else because they had the ins. They knew where you were and whatever happened to you. And so the Gestapo was feared, bitterly feared.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting to me that on Kristallnacht, there were already quite a few concentration camps. And in the end, there were about 300.
And they weren't all in Germany anymore.
Right.
They were in Poland and so on. And some were extermination camps. And if we can make the distinction, Auschwitz is what everybody knows, and many others. And I have a number of friends today that survived. And I also know of a number of people that, of course, died. There was also one camp that was called Theresienstadt or Terezin, which was a showpiece that the Nazis had done, like a city.
Right.
And the Red Cross came and looked, and they had to pretend they were playing music and theater. Well, I have a number of my families are buried in Theresienstadt, and I was there just 2 years ago. And it is awkward and perhaps too sanitary what they've done with it. It's so cleaned up that you cannot even fathom what went on. I think it is because it's attached to a city that still exists. It's just sort of on the outskirts of Theresienstadt, the city. But I have some very close friends who both parents died in Theresienstadt. I have in-laws. But it was not, supposedly not an extermination camp. It was sort of a place where you were sent first, and then they sent you to Auschwitz and other places. The only other thing, and I don't know if it fits, my husband's 2 sisters were killed in Auschwitz.
I'm sorry.
And he did not know, he knows it was Auschwitz, but he never knew when they were killed, or the date. And you know, Jews customarily say a prayer every year to commemorate the date of death of a person. What my husband had done, his father is buried in Denver, Colorado, and he had the names of his 2 sisters put on the tombstone, so there would be some memento of their names.
That's lovely.
It has nothing to do with Kristallnacht, you know.
So after the war, they had the Nuremberg trials. Do you think that justice was served there?
I think they did the best they could. How dare I judge that? I think that the people that were in the forefront of the incredible horror, crimes, viciousness, I think they were judged fairly and condemned. I know that all of us have seen movies about that are worthwhile and gruesome. Not everybody was caught, but it was an earnest effort on behalf of the Allies, and you know.
Right, and actually most Germans just went back to their everyday life.
Many, those that didn't escape, and the many that went to Argentina and to Brazil, you know. Germans are clever. And many people asked me how I could go back to Germany. And it took me a number of years before I wanted to. But time has